So while I was recording the video for the Asus TUF RTX 3080, I was also recording this video you're watching now. Around a month ago, I asked Twitter, how much RAM is enough? What do you use your PC for, and how much RAM do you think you need or have? There was even a poll result suggesting that most people said that either 16 or 32 gigs was enough. But that begged the question, how much memory is enough? Bribe reckons that with casual gaming and zero video editing, 16 gigs is more than enough. In fact, he says he hardly goes over 10 gigabytes. Jason Baker reckons 64 gigs would be great because he doesn't want to touch his PC for 10 years, however he also thinks that 16 is more than enough. According to Hox13, he reckons personally as a gamer and a part-time streamer I have 32 gigs RAM, it seems like enough and it seems like that's the norm nowadays. First Up reckons there are some really good videos on YouTube explaining how much you need. He reckons 16 is more than enough. You only start needing more RAM once you get into bigger resolution video files and VFX. Before that, he wouldn't see the benefit in 32 gig plus. Crucial Memory themselves responded and said if you're like me and you have 30 tabs open, Photoshop, Excel docs, and Spotify while you play games, you might need 32. And Carrie suggested that her boyfriend's 8 gigabytes gets maxed out by Google Chrome, causing her to have an aneurysm. I of course suggested he might need a bigger stick. But how much desktop memory do we actually need? Our beloved Russ says we need at least 10 gigabytes at the bare minimum to make it work, or we need a recommended 16 gigs of RAM. Now the problem with recommended specs is that you can never really tell what a game is going to do on average. Most people don't just play Rust, most people have things open. Some people have Discord open, Netflix, Chrome maybe. Chrome could be running a number of different tabs. However, if I'm playing my game and I have other things open and I'm using 12.5 gigs of the recommended 16 gigabytes, it's basically the same as me having a car that has the ability to drive 250, except drive it 220 kilometers per hour all day, every day. It's madness. So the idea was simple. I was going to take all three sizes in the Twitter poll of gaming memory, run the three separate instances of the game in very similar environments under strain. Whilst playing those three instances of Rust, I'm going to create a synthetic load. I'm going to open up Chrome with a bunch of tabs and videos playing. I'll leave all of my unnecessary programs running in my system tray, and I will use the task manager to observe what's happening. To keep things fair, we're going to be using three identical sets of dual channel memory. We're going to be using the Crucial Ballistics RGB gaming memory, and as mentioned, all three identical. We've got a 16GB kit, which is two 8GB sticks. We've got a 32GB kit, which is two 16 sticks, and shockingly, we have a 64GB, which is two 32GB sticks. All of them are running at 3200 MHz, and they are identical in every way other than their capacity. And unsurprisingly, the first test we're going to see is the 16GB kit, and it is the weakest of the batch, naturally. The system reckons that with the synthetic load, all the tabs and software running as well as Rust, 12GB is in use, causing about 105 frames per second. However, when we look at the 32GB kit, we get completely different results. We've got 14GB of memory in use, 2 gigs more than the 16 gig test, however we've got an almost identical load. I don't quite understand why this is happening, however it is seeing frames between 120 and 135, and it's running a lot smoother according to my eyes. The weirdest part comes in with the 64GB test. Again, an almost identical load to the previous two tests, however now the computer is consuming 14.5GB of memory. The strange part about this, however, is the frames per second. It seems to be almost in between the 32GB and 16GB tests. I have no idea why it's achieving less frames per second than the 32GB test, however it is. All stats are on screen, so if there's anyone that's watching that is a memory expert or at least a systems expert that can explain this to me, please leave a comment. I would like to understand why a 64GB kit is actually achieving less frames than a 32GB kit. I do want to understand it myself. Perhaps you can use the information on screen and explain to me why this phenomenon is happening. One noticeable thing that stuck out with the 16GB test is I constantly got these little micro stutters. Now after I'm done looting this box and I try and cross this little bridge, you will see a small stutter. I'm going to play a replay just so you can see it again. There it is. One more time. And that little stutter happens constantly. Every few minutes I get a little stutter with 16 gigs. However, with the 32GB kit and with the 64GB kit, I experienced not a single stutter throughout my gameplay experience. I suspect it's got something to do with the fact that I'm using 14.2GB of my 16GB kit available, and the reason why it's not happening with the bigger kit is probably due to the fact that I have more available memory. It turns out the real difference we can feel is not in gaming but rather in video editing. I've opened up my Adobe Premiere Pro and what you can see me doing now is called scrubbing. Scrubbing is when you drag your slider and you start moving around your workspace. It displays your footage so far in your preview window. With the 16GB kit, whenever I moved the slide, I had noticeable loading times, the complex video files trying to catch up with my movements. However, with the 32GB and 64GB kit, I noticed a relatively smooth scrub. Now, obviously, you're not going to have a crystal clear scrub unless you're running some monstrous industrial editing machine. However, the benefits of the 32 and 64GB kits were definitely felt during the editing session, and most notably during the rendering. Now, the 3080 video that I'm working on, I'm going to render them in all 3 different speeds of RAM, and even though I'm only rendering a small portion of the video, the results speak for themselves. The more memory you have, the much faster your workflow is, the faster things render, the smoother things come out, and it's just generally better for creatives. The 64GB kit rendered the portion of video in 7 minutes and 12 seconds, while the 32GB kit rendered the exact same amount of footage in 7 minutes and 53 seconds, and the 16GB kit rendered far behind at 9 minutes 4 seconds. Now, as I mentioned, the render that I just did was a partial render. However, with a full-sized video and a more complicated workspace, you can imagine those times would get amplified drastically, and if you're one that edits very often and uploads very often, the time savings could be huge. So in short, to answer that original Twitter question, how much gaming memory do you need? From what it looks like, if you're a very casual gamer and you don't take things too seriously, 16 gigs should probably suffice. You'll only notice minor irritations. The sweet spot at the moment seems to look like 32 gigs. I honestly don't see the benefit of 64 gigs at the moment unless you are a hardcore video editor and you do it very often and you do it for a living. If you casually edit a video now and then, you do a little bit of streaming, you do some gaming, a 32 gig kit will be more than sufficient. However, bearing in mind that the new PlayStation and Xbox is coming out, game titles are going to start getting a lot more complicated, so perhaps you'd want to future-proof yourself with 64, maybe even 128. That seems unnecessary to me. In my personal opinion, 32 gig kit, perfect kit for the job. What are your thoughts? Obviously, you guys didn't see the Twitter post. If you do have some input, please leave a comment below. I'd like to engage on people to get a better understanding, obviously with my previous 3080 video as well as this one and future videos coming out about resolutions. I'm trying to get a better understanding of how Rust works. In fact, me and Shadowflax were discussing this exact topic yesterday. We're trying to get a better understanding of how exactly everything works and what makes it work the way it does. Rust seems to be very funny when it comes to performance, so the more information we can pull together, the better the results will be. A special shout out goes out to Crucial Ballistics Memory. Thank you guys for sending me the test kits. I do appreciate that. They are great sticks of memory. I noticed they ran extremely cool compared to my old HyperX Furies. Thank you for that. To my darling patrons, you guys are getting treated. 2 videos in 2 days. Oh, there's going to be another one tomorrow. Thank you again for all your support. I thoroughly appreciate you guys. If any of you guys would like to follow my social media, all my social media links are in the video description below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Flak out.